everybody, and welcome to Attendance Bias. I am your host, Brian Weinstein. My guest for today's episode is Professor of Philosophy at Oregon State University, Dr. Stephanie Jenkins. You've probably heard of Dr. Jenkins. In 2014, she began teaching a course at Oregon State University titled Fish and Philosophy, where she melded classic teachings of philosophy with aspects of fish and the fish community. After the class was announced and began to be taught, it started to gain traction and a little bit of notice in the fish world, and eventually it gained so much popularity and enthusiasm that a full in-person conference on the topic was hosted at the university in May 2019. But before the course, before the conference, before everything, there was Dick's. Stephanie chose to discuss Fish's show on September 2nd, 2011 at Dick's Sporting Goods Park in Commerce City, Colorado. Not only was this Fish's first show at the now legendary and traditional venue, but it was also the famed S show, where all 26 songs played that night began with the letter S, with the arguable exception of The Sloth, which maybe you could argue begins with a T, but that's for another podcast. Throughout this episode, Stephanie tells us about what it was like walking into Dick's for the first time with a blank slate of expectations, how creating a college course involving fish made her feel like a more complete educator, and she tells us about a spiritual experience that came through a 68-second sustained guitar note enslaved to the traffic light. So book your flight, avoid the prairie dogs, and make sure you know how you're getting back to your hotel after the show. We're going to join Dr. Stephanie Jenkins to take a look back at September 2nd, 2011 at Dick's Sporting Goods Park in Commerce City, Colorado. Thank you so much for joining us on Attendance Bias today. How are you?
I am great, all things considered. Thanks for having me, Brian.
Stephanie, I listened to some podcasts that you've appeared on in the past, my favorite being the Female Centrics podcast with Donnie B. You said that you got into fish around the summer of 1995 when someone lent you a live one. Is that your fish origin story?
That was my first experience with fish, yes. I had been house sitting on a horse farm in Maine in the summer of 1995, and I remember very vividly kind of sitting on a trampoline, no less, with a group of friends when we got the news on the radio that Jerry Garcia had died. And so my first kind of musical introduction to jam bands was through the Grateful Dead. And not too long after that, when I was starting my freshman year of high school and was practicing in our school jazz band, a friend gave me a copy of the live one, and that it brought together my love for the Grateful Dead, my love for improvisational music, and especially classic rock. And that was my first introduction to fish. And what's funny is that Bouncing Around the Room was actually played at a number of our high school dances.
I got into fish a year later in the summer of 1996, although I had not been into the Grateful Dead previously. When I was at a summer camp in Massachusetts, they used to play Sample in a Jar at the dances.
Sample in a Jar at dances.
But I couldn't really understand what was being said, so I made up my own version of Sample in a Jar in my head.
Can you remember any of your made-up lyrics?
I think it was a centerfold in a car. Centerfold in a car. I think that's what I heard.
Okay.
So if Tom Marshall is ever listening, you did a better job. But how long were you into the Grateful Dead before you got a live one?
I was 14, 15 years old, right?
Yeah, so, me too, yeah.
Yeah, it wasn't a long time, but it was enough to merge my interests in kind of the free-flowing improv of the jazz that I was playing with rock, and that was something that I didn't know was possible prior to getting introduced to that line of music.
And were there any songs on a live one that really stuck with you?
Slave to the Traffic Light and Harry Hood, because of the emotional depth of the peaks of those songs. But then, of course, you can't go wrong with Tweezer.
Right.
That was the first Tweezer I ever heard, and I'm so grateful that song has been brought into my life. Like, there's many transformative jams since that moment.
So in the Venn diagram of fish and classic rock.
What does that mean for me?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So Zeppelin Hendrix and Pink Floyd are my go-tos for classic rock. In fact, I in my Meaning of Existence course, I teach Dark Side of the Moon alongside the canonical figures in the history of philosophy. I live for the moments when Phish covers Hendrix, right? Bold as Love and Fire.
Mm-hmm. And if you're at Jimmy's night for the Baker's Dozen, The Wind Cries Mary too. Was there?
Oh my goodness, yes. That was an unbelievable moment. I was actually a traffic light that turned blue tomorrow at Halloween once.
That's so funny because and I've said this on the podcast many times, my favorite band ever before Phish was The Who. Along with The Who, yeah. And the ones that, along with the bands that you said, of course, what I now call garden variety classic rock.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of a stepping stone because Phish isn't always easy to digest, especially if you're talking about Tweezer from a live one, for example. But they do share that DNA because the band, I think, grew up listening to a lot of the same stuff we're talking about. And so if you take a stepping stone from Hendrix and Pink Floyd and The Who and Led Zeppelin, Phish is there, plus that jazz part that you were mentioning. Where does the jazz fit in your musical building blocks?
So I played in a jazz band in high school on percussion, and that was what drew me into Fishman's playing, right? Is that he plays like a percussionist. A lot of rock drummers, it's the focus is on the hard sound and playing a lot of beats. But for Fishman, he really plays the range of the instrument, which is something that really drew me in, right? Listening to a live one was the first time that I heard some of the percussive styles that we were learning in jazz band put on a rock kit.
What song about Fishman drew you in as a drummer?
It really wasn't a single song. It was the technique, right? He's just such an original drummer. He's in his own category for me, right? And I think for a lot of Phish fans too.
To dig a little bit deeper into your Phish background, when was your first show and what do you remember most from it?
So that is a kind of a really great memory to go back to, right? So my first show was February 24th, 2003 at Continental Airlines Arena. Right. So there was
B.B. King, right?
Yeah, that was the B.B. King show, which is the first thing that everybody remembers. And I love B.B. King is such a standard blues guitar player. I never in my life thought that I was going to see him at a Phish show. But, so the early days of my Phish listening comprised of CDs, albums, and then tapes that friends had given to me. So this was, there was a period of time in which I was uninitiated in the world of live music. And what I remember is the intensity of the crowd. Walking into the venue, just the sheer, pure excitement that was palpable amongst every single individual in that room was unlike anything I had ever experienced before. And I really remember the chalk dust from that show. But the thing that has always stood out for me was, those three songs with B.B. King. So every day I have the blues, Rock Me Baby, and The Thrill Is Gone. Listening to this show, I've been listening to a lot of Phish, like many of us. I've done all of the Dinner and Movies, all of the Beacon Jams. This past Friday, I wasn't quite sure what to do with myself without a Beacon Jam, and I sit down and listen to this show again, and there were these moments of just connectivity with the music and thinking back to what it's like to be in the venue that really sat with me and made me just feel kind of mourn the loss of live music in a way that was different from the other moments that I've had throughout the course of the pandemic. I think it's because there are some particularly energetic moments in this show that, thinking back to my first Styx experience, have made me long for what it's like to be in a crowd full of strangers.
I can't wait for a time when we can embrace it and not be anxious about it. And I think more than anything, these gifts that fish has given us is allowed us to connect online. If you've been on Twitter or the chats, on any number of websites, it's really a beautiful thing that exists outside of that venue.
We're all still in the storage box jam.
In 2014, you began teaching your first philosophy of fish course, or philosophy and fish. And you mentioned that your school director at OSU, Oregon State University, was very supportive of the class when you proposed it. Is that right?
Yeah, so it has kind of a longer trajectory, and that my love for fish and philosophy actually kind of always ran parallel to one another. So around the same time that I was first getting into fish, or at least kind of fish recordings and albums, I was also my first introduction to philosophy in high school. And so I had these kind of, like parallel interests. This actually relates to my Dix trajectory, which was that the 2012 show was right before I started my first professional job here at Oregon State. And it was during the Light Jam, which was actually one of my favorite jams ever. During that jam, I had an epiphany, which was, if I can't be in my whole self in my professional life, right? If there's always this important piece of myself that I have to hide, I don't think I'm going to be able to survive this profession. And so I went to my school director and said, hey, I really think that the way that I have been taught to teach this course is not giving my students what they need. They really need to have a transformative experience in the classroom, and just walking them through the history of moral theory is not giving them lessons that they're going to take with them for the course of their life. And I actually went back, got my students all together, took them outside, and made them rip up the syllabus together. And
sounds very therapeutic.
And then, this was something that I took away from fish, which is that you need to have the embodied experience of something in order for that memory to stick with you. I actually wanted them to undergo that experience of physically kind of ripping it up, picking up the pieces, and then going back into the classroom and talking about how we were going to move forward. And so I just, at a dinner party with some colleagues, said, I always had this idea of, what if I taught a class about fish and philosophy? I was expecting the immediate response to be, yeah, don't do that. Right?
Yeah, that's my next question, because I think that fish, even now, even in 2020, with all they've accomplished, they have nothing to prove professionally or musically. I still think most of the straight world, for lack of a better phrase, still sees them as, quote, that stoner band that my friend was into in college, which is not deserved. I would expect someone who's in an academic setting, especially, to say that's not appropriate for a school classroom setting.
And that was the response that I was anticipating. It was why I had, hidden my love of fish for so long. I went to my dean, which is the next kind of level in the academic hierarchy, and with a kind of a mock syllabus, just to make sure that everybody was really okay that I was going to do this. And it was my Dean Larry Rogers, and what he said was, this is a fantastic pilot for thinking about experiential and engaged learning with students. What if, in addition to the class, you got a bus, put some students on it, and took them to some live shows?
To literally get on the bus.
Yeah, like literally.
Yeah.
Right. And that was the first time that the concept of a field trip, right, kind of became possible in my mind. And I was actually the one that said, yeah, no, I don't want to be responsible for college students at a fish show. And
I wanted to ask you about that. Do you have students who know not much about fish, and they're signing up to get a credit requirement fulfilled? Or I was thinking, is it the opposite way, where you have a whole bunch of fish heads who don't know much about philosophy, and they see the word fish in the title of the course and go, oh man, I'll ace that one, to use my generic inaccurate voice. But I'm wondering, where is that balance?
The makeup of the class usually, so it's primarily kind of, a population of students who I lovingly refer to as fish noobs. And then there's will be a handful of students who might have a familial relationship to the band. And then every year there's been like 1 to 3 veteran fans who enroll in eCampus specifically because they want to take this class. And so these are kind of 2 of my main joys of teaching the class, which is that over the years since 2014 that I have really, really loved the experience of getting to every summer to introduce a new group of students, right, who have never listened to Phish to my favorite band. It's like getting a pair of noob glasses and being able to get to put them on, and it really gives me a newfound appreciation for all things Phish every time I get to teach it.
And you mentioned a little bit ago a field trip, right? That developed into, since it's an e-learning class, that a student could go to whatever show is geographically convenient for him or her. But when I listened to a previous podcast that you've been on, I think it's called The Rock School. I'll double check that. You discussed in 2018 that you were preparing for, it didn't happen yet as far as the recording went, a field trip to the Gorge. Yeah. Did that happen?
It did. And wow, what a transformative experience for everybody involved. So I took a group of about a half a dozen students, a mix of graduate and undergraduate students, to the Gorge Amphitheater. The class rented a van and drove up together, camped on in the camping grounds together, went to the shows together, and participated in a mini academic conference that I organized that took place on the concert ground.
In the camping grounds, right?
Yeah, the camping grounds, the Gorge Phish Studies Colloquium, which started as a collection of guest lectures that I was organizing for my students. And then what I realized is, well, let's just open it up to any fans who want to come and participate in an educational experience while they're at the concerts. And what was really amazing was that about 100 people came. And if you think about all of the other things that you could be doing at a Phish show, right? On the grounds, going swimming, just hanging out with your friends, drinking beer, sleeping in, getting ready for the show. The number of people who turned out, who engaged with academic content, asked really thoughtful questions, and then just added to my students' educational experience. It was overwhelming for me as an educator.
I have a couple questions in the philosophy realm, and I'm really going to test myself here because I don't really know what I'm talking about, but I love to bounce some ideas off you. You've described philosophy in previous interviews as the art of questioning and the ability to receive wisdom and values. You've also described it as a skill set for being human.
The art of asking critical questions and challenging received wisdom.
And it made me think of questions that are directly asked in Phish songs rather than questions that are derived from their music. Like not stuff that I ask myself after a Phish show, but literal questions that appear in their lyrics. And so I'm wondering if you always have your philosophy hat on for a song like Halley's Comet, where there are a bunch of questions and some of them are just goofball nonsense, like, would you like to have your thick strawberry goo? But then there's something like, what is the central theme to this everlasting spoof? So when you think of Phish and in terms of philosophy, are you able to kind of pick and choose when to take Phish seriously in their lyrics?
That's a really great question. So I like to think of Phish shows as great places to get some thinking done, right? I always bring a notebook with me.
Dry ice factory, right?
So sometimes I get lost in my thoughts at the show, right? Like, drawing connections between Slave to the Traffic Light and Foucault's Discipline and Punish, right? How am I going to write out this essay if I want to explain it to other fans? And then that problem intensified once I merged the projects together, right? Phish was no longer just my escape space, and it became a professional space.
It becomes work.
Where I might get, questions from fans specifically about philosophy or about my class while I'm, at the concert and things along those lines. And what I found is that if I think about philosophy as another instrument, that it allows me to find a balance. That if I'm overly focusing on the ideas and it's drowning out the other instruments, it's time to turn it off. But if I let the ideas flow and think about it as kind of like a mind map that's happening over the course of the show, that it's the sweet spot balance that works really well for me.
So to make things a little bit lighter, let's dive into the tour from summer 2011 a little bit, and then let's talk about Dick's and the show that you chose for today. 2011 was a relatively light touring year for Phish. They just played 41 shows, and aside from the show on January 1st, which was technically part of the 2010 holiday run, and the New Year's Eve run later in 2011, there was only this summer tour. There were no other shows.
Most of the shows were in the summer.
Yes. And I don't remember very much about Phish in the summer of 2011. At the time, I was engaged. I was preparing for a wedding. And so for maybe the first time in my life, Phish took, I wouldn't even say a backseat, but in the middle row. It was a week before my wedding. I still went to Super Bowl. I wasn't going to skip that. But I went to the shows. I went to the shows with my then fiance and then wife in Bethel Woods at the beginning of the summer, and then Super Bowl, and then waited until the New Year's run. So maybe that's why I wasn't as involved with Phish that summer. But this was the first time that the band played Dick's. And including 2019, they've turned it into this end of the summer Labor Day weekend tradition. But at the time, I had no idea what was to come. I never heard of the place before. I had never heard of Commerce City. To me, there's Denver, and then there's the rest of Colorado. I've since expanded my my knowledge, but at the time, I didn't really know. So, speaking to you, who attended this very first show ever at Dick's, what was it like walking into the stadium for the first time?
Wow, I wish I had a time machine so that I could take you back.
Don't we all?
So one of the reasons why I'm really excited to talk to you about this particular show is because you said you've never been to Dick's, and I've been to all of them. It has come to be my favorite venue. So 2011, I was working on my dissertation, living in New Jersey, kind of going through a difficult period. And like you said, I was for different reasons, not quite as connected to the Phish world as I had been at other point in times. And I went to Super Bowl and had an amazing time, met some great friends, really got connected to the parts of myself that felt alive, right, when I was at live music. And I just decided that I had to go to the next show that I could possibly get to. And it ended up being this S show. I put my plans together kind of at the last minute, and that really shows you how the venue has changed over the years, and that the show was undersold in 2011. It was really easy to get tickets. It was really easy to find a hotel room. You can't do a last minute Dick's in the same way.
No, you have to book it a year in advance now.
Yeah, right. And there's no guarantee that you're going to get tickets in the lottery. It's actually, it's become a big production with my crew to get tickets to these shows, right? And as it is for anybody who wants to go. But I decided that it was almost like this pilgrimage for me. I'd never been to Denver. And I quickly learned that Commerce City is not the same as Denver. It's a suburb that's north of the city, so it's closer to the airport than the rest of Denver. And it's kind of this residential industrial park area. It's kind of a generic stadium, and it makes it easy to handle a large number of people because there are soccer fields and these kind of grassy areas. It's perfect for having the camping. Dick's has one of the best shakedowns around. And I remember very distinctly going up and parking myself on the grass at gate C and having this sense of it was a total blank slate. Right, not knowing what's going to happen, not knowing what the inside of the venue was going to look like, not having any sense that the set list and antics were coming, and also being there by myself. For most of the shows that I had gone to up at this point, I had either gone with friends or my partner at the time. And this was the first time that I had traveled this far alone to go to a Phish show. Anything was possible at this moment. And so the reason why I wanted to pick this show for you.
Right. I was going to ask, why do you have attendance bias for this show?
It's a great example, I think, of attendance bias, because I look back at this show as one that was transformative for me, right? My life before the S show and my life after the S show were never the same. And that's because I met some of my best friends at this venue. And that's why I always, when people ask me, should I go to a Phish show alone? Absolutely, right? Because you might leave that show with a new best friend.
The whole thing that I got from listening to this show in preparation for this recording is you could feel the electricity right from the start. You know, for what you called it as a blank slate, that no one knew what to expect, and they open with Sample in a Jar. That is, you know, the quintessential show opener. You can go to 100 shows and see Sample 40 times open a show. You know, nothing unusual about that, but the crowd really sounds psyched. They really do. There's a ferocious solo toward the end, and then they go into Sparkle, which is a great follow-up. It keeps the energy going. By the way, this was the only time this song was played that year in 2011, and I could almost hear people dancing. And they, you know, you could hear it through the audience. And then they play Sloth, and I wrote down on my notes, what a killer set so far, energetic, fun with rarities. And I'm wondering at this point, just 3 songs in, did you or anyone around you catch on anything at all? Because to me, listening to it, I could find it very easy to just bypass the idea or not see any trends. I was just having fun listening. I almost forgot it was the S show.
It's funny that you asked this about around the Sloth, because that's when I think the debates about what was happening with the set list started, and I totally dismissed it. I think I was one of the last people at the show to realize what was happening. And that's because the Sample and Sparkle are kind of standard openers. I think you did an excellent job describing that what separates this show out is the energy, right? That there's something about the flow and the intensity that gets created by the creative workarounds that the band has to come up with to fit these songs that wouldn't normally be placed together, right? And sometimes it works for flow, and sometimes it doesn't. I think the first set's a little bit disjointed, and the second set is fantastic.
And during Phish shows, what I would call special shows, right, with a capital S, it's a designation, not just a feeling. Special shows, like this one certainly is, you get a certain tip at a certain point to, oh, wait, maybe this is a special show. Like maybe I should just add my extra ears, my Yoda ears on right now. And I would think that Sweet Virginia would be around where those ears would go on for me, because I don't know, I'll look this up, but I don't think they've played it much more before then or much more after then. But this must have given the gag away, right? It was the 4th song in with an S. That's a complete rarity.
I mean, it's a rarity, and it's a gorgeous, just beautiful tune to sit back in, soak up the crowd, and look at the beautiful scenery of the Colorado mountains in the background. It really was a special moment. And I mean, for me, I still was not yet a buyer into the set list annex theories, right? It felt like it could just be chalked up to a coincidence or the band wanting to give us something special because we were at a new venue.
I think the first 3 I would call coincidence if I were there.
Yeah.
You know, I can't speak for myself literally in the past, but if I were there, I would say Sample, Sparkle, Sloth. All right, that could be at any show. But Sweet Virginia,
it was this kind of hotel for me that maybe was the first time in my mind where I said, okay, so maybe the theorists, right, maybe they're onto something.
Yeah, maybe there actually is a conspiracy developing right here. And then by Strange Design, Stash, and Sneak and Sally, it had to be obvious, right? I don't want to make you keep explaining that you weren't buying into it. I'm just wondering at what point did it because I love these gags. And not only that, I called this show artistic a little bit ago. You said the first set was a little disjointed. I didn't get that at all from the recording. To me, it just sounded so beautifully set up.
That makes me really happy to hear. It's, I think looking back to when I was at the show, that it fit together pretty smoothly. But I know listening back over it a couple of times in preparation for this interview, it felt like there were some kind of energetic peaks and dips over the course of the set with, like kind of Sweet Virginia and Strange Design.
And Susskind Hotel also didn't get a very great response. It's only been played 3 times, so I have to imagine that was maybe a go to the bathroom and get a beer song.
I was really happy to hear it, and this was when, for me, it started to. I wish that Fish kept playing this song. It has such an unusual series of rhythms.
It's a Mike song, that's why. Mike Gordon song.
It highlights kind of Fishman's innovative uses of drum fills really well. This was the first kind of song that got any kind of jam at the show. The tempo was a little bit faster than it was at Super Bowl for this, and I didn't realize until I was going back over this to get ready to talk to you that I'm actually in the Susskind Hotel 100% Club.
Wow! Congratulations.
I don't know if that's the stat that I want, like a badge.
You get a badge, yeah. And Stash, I think, also had a nice mini jam. It sounds like the vibe there was incredible. There's a part in about 2 minutes where the crowd, you just hear it build and build and build. It's so rare that I feel that just from audio, being separated from a show, not actually being at a show, but it leaps right through the recording. And there's a great peak at 10 minutes where it builds, peaks, hold it up there, slow down again. It's a really good type 1. Let's really get the crowd sucked in. And they follow up with Sneakin' Sally, which is always a crowd pleaser, right?
Always a crowd pleaser. And the Sneaking Sally Sparks is actually one of the places that I marked out as being a highlight for me from this show. The Sneaking Sally has this really kind of energetic, powerful, bouncy energy to it. And about 5 minutes into it, Trey settles into this kind of repetitive groove that's meditative for me, and then the other 3 members of the band just kind of fold around into it. It has this really spatial feel to it to me. That and then of course it has this really gorgeous transition into Sparks, right? And so it's the building up of the energy of the Sneaking Sally, and then the meticulous segue combined with the surprise of getting Sparks at a Fish show.
And more than that, they nailed it.
They really did. Yeah. This was the song that shut down any kind of debate about what was happening with the set list, and then kind of all of the chatter in the crowd immediately transformed into speculation about, is it just the first set, or are they going to do it in the second set? And if they do it in the second set, what do we have coming? And the wish list of all of the songs just started.
And that's the best thing. Those are the best things about Fish, that it's never one layer. The joke is never obvious. So it's not just, okay, all the songs begin with S, haha. That's like the first idea. Then it's, well, how deep into our catalog are we going to go? Are we going to play any new songs we haven't? Are we going to play a song we haven't played since the 80s? Are we going to play Sabotage for the encore? We'll get there. But then it becomes a game for the fans where it's, okay, now we know what's coming. Like you said, what's left? What was played? Does this song count? Does the sloth count? Because it starts with a T. It's never just on the surface.
I think that's also part of what makes the setlist antics so special, is that it creates this kind of central aspect around which fans can bond. And it really builds a kind of networked community, not just about being fans, but about the process of the unfolding of the gag and participating in it as it happens. The other kind of comparable comparisons to this might be something like, when you're going to a Halloween show and you're trying to guess what the album is going to be, right? Or you're going to a New Year's show and you're trying to guess what the gag is going to be. It's this kind of central thread that ties everybody in the venue together, right? But with a show like this, and it being a new level of playing with setlist antics, it really it made you feel connected to everybody around you in a way that is different from just a regular Fish show.
And to bring it all back up with Shine a Light, which is the second song off, why is it escape? Exile on Main Street.
Exile on Main Street, yep.
Right. And to close it all out with Split Open and Melt and Squirming Coil. What fun.
It's a really special show to get two Rolling Stone covers.
Yeah.
And not just in the same show, in the same set.
And so I have to imagine, you said it wasn't sold out, right? There was a lot of space around?
Yeah, there was a lot more. You had a lot more dancing room at this show than you do these days at Dick's.
And talk about a connection, even though there aren't a lot of people there, singing, may the good Lord shine a light on every song you sing, your favorite tune. Like, you must have really felt, everyone there must have really felt as part of a whole.
Yeah, there was a transcendent aspect to this show that really for me came through in the second set. As I told you, that part of the reason why I picked this show is because it was a kind of transformative one for me. And that was because I had this really sacred experience in the second set that I will never forget. And then in many ways I have been chasing ever since it happened. And Shine a Light just kind of foreshadowed that for me.
To start the second set of this show, though, to get back into the S's, they open with Sand, and you want to talk about philosophical lyrics. These are some of Tom Marshall's best.
I love Sand. It is such a great song that you can't go wrong with, but the lyrics are very explicitly addressing the temporal quality of human existence. And I actually will sometimes use it as a case study in my existentialism class with students.
That makes a lot of sense.
Who aren't in my Fish class will get their first introduction to the band through Sand.
Moving on to Simple and Steam. To me, Steam was the emotional weight of this show. And I was slow coming around to Steam. I didn't love it when it was new. Really, when it was new. There was something a little angular about it. And a lot of Fish's music is angular, but for something, it didn't grab me right away. And there was just something about it. I never dug deep into it. I finally came around. But now when I listen back to it, this is only the fifth time it was played, ever.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's still a really new song.
And they own it.
This is a must-listen version of Steam.
Yes.
But I do think it's really important that you pair it with the Simple, because the segue is it's gorgeous, right? And it really builds into the kind of the mystical quality of Steam that you get at the show. The Simple, like any Simple, it has these beautiful kind of profound moments, but there's this section of it around 6 minutes and 30 seconds.
Yeah, I wrote that down too. Yeah.
Yeah, when Trey quiets down. I mean, just everybody quiets down, and Trey starts into this repetitive melody that feels to me like maybe it's a tease that I'm missing, or maybe I've just listened to it so much that it's taken on a life of its own. And you can hear kind of Fishman steadily driving things on his cymbals and keeping time throughout it.
Yes.
And then Mike just lets out this bass bomb.
Yeah, the recording can't handle it when I listen to it. It rattles my earphones.
So this was, I listened to this simple and then went back and re-listened to this just like in my house with the lights off, raising my hands up into the air, and just tried to imaginatively transport myself back into the venue, because wow, that energy is the antidote to the pandemic. Right? There's something about it was just so centering.
And yeah, it is, especially at the end, like the last 2 or 3 minutes, like you were talking about, the segue into Steam. And Steam is not very centering. It is profound in a different way.
Yeah. It's it has this otherworldly quality to it.
Mm-hmm.
The Trey solo is monstrous. It's the highlight, I think, of this Steam for me. But I actually went back, it has a number of peaks throughout that build throughout the jam. But I actually think that you should go back and re-listen to it and focus just on Paige. Well, not you, just that's what I did myself. The
royal you.
I really focused on the Trey solo, that there's some beautiful work happening that supports and kind of complements the solo that I think I had missed in previous listenings that I really, really appreciated this time around.
And that's what part of the mastery of this show is, where you mentioned earlier that you thought some of the songs in the first set didn't really go well together, that they were, or you called it a little disjointed at least. Considering that the band obviously had to organize this, right? They weren't going to just go into Divided Sky, you know, right. Even if it felt right. They couldn't if they were going to stick to the gag. The way that these just fit together like Legos, you know, they really do, that it sounds so natural, but it's obviously constructed to some degree.
And I think that the second set is like Legos. It's beautifully constructed. The songs flow in and out of one another beautifully, and really set them up for some memorable moments. Including
the next song, which is Soul Shakedown Party, which is the most grounding of any of the songs, I think, in this set, where it's like, all right, now we can just relax for a little bit, because both Simple and Steam were very heady.
Yeah.
And Slow Shakedown Party is just a, Bob Marley, move your shoulders, move your head, sing along, and it's a rarity.
Come back to reality, settle into the dance party.
Like the outside dance, yeah. And then to move on to Seven Below, it was a pretty good segue. And I almost forgot about the S gag while listening, because the vibe of the show is that good.
There feels to be like three different themes that develop over the course of this jam for me. One that kind of picks up on some really productive energy around the 3-minute and 30-second mark. And then there's a few minutes of kind of focusing on what he's doing. And then around 7 minutes, I have that Page is doing some really majestic playing. And then at the 9-minute mark, it takes on this just otherworldly quality that, I mean, I don't know how you felt, but I felt transported.
I called it controlled chaos.
Controlled chaos. I love it. Yeah. This is the that moment of kind of otherworldly transportation. Like, this is when I start anticipating like the band picking off into a tweezer or a piper, right? And that's not going to happen.
Not today, yeah.
Right. So this is my my qualm with the Seven Below, is I think that it should be on the jam charts, but also it is unfortunately gets the type 2 jamming gets cut off by the Susie Greenberg.
And Susie Greenberg, though, is a nice change of pace and vibe from a real, I called it, I'm sure you'll like this, a weirdo jam straight to party time. Like from the end of Seven Below is the weirdo jam straight to Susie Greenberg, a 3-chord rock song.
It feels like a set closer almost.
It does, very much.
And then we get the rest of the S show.
Right. Sense and Subtle Sounds, which was another killer segue, by the way.
And the transition into Slave is heavenly. This series of 3 songs, Sense, Slave, and Silent in the Morning, I had a very profound kind of quasi-religious experience at the show.
Tell us about it.
It progressed over the course of the 3 songs. And so for me, they have to be played together. I don't ever separate them out. The Slave is an all-time highlight for me because it has a gorgeous jam, but it has this really intense 68-second sustained note.
Oh, I called it the note at 6 minutes and 45 seconds.
The note. And the experience that I had at this show, right? I'm not, or at least up until this point, I was not a religious person, but I really felt like I was I came into contact with or was kind of called by some kind of divine power, right? Of being launched out of the meaninglessness of human existence and connected to this profound sense of belonging and being cared for by the universe that I have never experienced before, right? So it played out over the course of these 3 songs, but it really intensified in the sustained note. And I was so overwhelmed by the transcendent beauty and power of this that I just started crying in the middle of it, right? Like I just could, it was the only way that I could in the moment pay homage to what was unfolding was to kind of let it all go. And the segue into Silent in the Morning, right? It's at the time I thought it was the only performance in which there had been no horse, because I wasn't aware of any previous recordings, but it turns out that they had done it a few other times. But it was still really special to have it placed out of context like that and in conjunction with the slave.
Yeah, it is unexpected to have Silent in the Morning played without the horse. And yeah, you're right that they had done it before. They went back to the pairing of it in 2012 to 2013. But then in 2013, it almost became a trend that they would play it by itself.
About 10 shows when the horse was just disappeared and he got Silent in the Morning in all sorts of contexts.
Yeah, but for you in this place and this time, it must have felt divine because of how unexpected it was.
It really did, and that's why the moving into sanity, right? This kind of moment of profound reflection of, okay, like everybody loses their mind once in a while, and maybe I did at this particular
just a couple
show,
times, right?
And here's the perfect meditative song for me to think through what just happened.
Yeah, and they closed it with Sweet Adeline, which I thought it was very funny that they used to play this or sing it in the early 90s when they were playing very small clubs, and now they're in one of the largest venues they've ever played at Dick's, and they're doing it again. You know, there is no place and time for Fish. They just are.
I mean, a cappella Fish is always very special. And it really did just feel like a fitting close to a gorgeous set.
Well, we're not a gorgeous set, yes, but we're not done with the show yet because they go off, they come back on, and people must have been racking their brains to be like, what else hasn't been played?
So what's really funny is that down on the floor, at least amongst the people that I was with, there was this one guy who, from the start of the set break, said, "You guys, they're going to play Sabotage, and it's going to be the encore." And everybody was, like, no way, right? No way. They're not going to play it. Right? That's just impossible. It's too much of a rarity. And so, right, so they, it was on the radar, but it was on the radar as the thing that wasn't going to get played, even when everybody was pulling out these kind of off the wall wish list songs. And then they did it. And so then, like, everybody was high-fiving him the whole time and just jumping up and down. It was energy that I can only compare to hearing Isabella at the Baker's Dozen.
Yeah, right? That was something else.
Freaking out because the impossible really did happen. That is the best description I think I could give to what it felt like leaving the show. And I said to myself, I made a promise to myself on the floor is I will never miss a show at this venue.
And you haven't.
I'm just going to keep, I haven't. But at the time, we didn't know that it was going to be a tradition, right? And so the two traditions that were established at the show were the setlist antics, which continued for a number of years, but then the tying of Labor Day weekend to Fish, right, at this particular venue. And so, there are other venues that have a special connection like that. Every year when we anticipate where the New Year's run is going to be, of course, right, Madison Square Garden is the the front runner, but it's not a given, right? You don't know where New Year's Eve is going to be. You don't know if and where the Halloween show is going to be. But over the years, what has happened is that I just kind of acclimated to the fact that I will be spending this entire week of my life in Denver.
Right, death, taxes, and dicks.
Yeah. And so, there's a recurring, even before the Fish show gets announced, I just have this recurring calendar date in my phone that marks out kind of the week surrounding Labor Day weekend. That's when I go to Denver to see Fish, to connect with friends who have become family, and the fact that it's it's its own holiday for me. Has become this kind of reflective time of what have I done over the course of the year? How has my life changed? How has my relationships with the band changed? And the moment in the pandemic that when the reality of what was happening in the world really settled in was when Dick's got canceled. It was like pulling an existential rug out from underneath me.
Yeah.
Right. And it feels weird to be complaining. I mean, maybe not to Phish fans to be complaining about the cancellation of the Phish show in the context of everything else that is happening. But that was when kind of the reality of what was going on really settled in for me. And it's part of why I wanted to pick, before I settled on this particular show, why I wanted to kind of honor the Dick's tradition in our conversations together is because kind of a way of maybe making up for the fact that we didn't get a Dick's run this year.
I wasn't there clearly, but I could tell just by the way that you're speaking of it, it was like a film strip was going through your head with a great soundtrack, but a film strip was going through your head as if you were seeing it in front of you as you were describing it. And
it's like this montage of images that I wish I could transport into your brain and those of your audience.
Well, you've done your best. You've done your best. But overall, I just want to say that this show, from an outsider looking in, it seems so much more than the music. It was about debuting in a big new venue and putting our stamp on it. I don't just say the band, but our as a collective. The music was very good with a number of highlights, but really it was about the gag and, like you've said, and not in these words, but just kind of embracing each other and setting ourselves up for future success.
And quite a bit of future success at this venue. I really hope that you get to have the Dick's experience sometime in your future.
Dr. Stephanie Jenkins, thank you so much for taking your time to not only talk about the show, but your career, your thoughts, sharing your epiphanies with us, just saying it all. It's been such a joy and such a pleasure.
Thank you so much for putting this podcast together. I love that you have found a way to fill the absence of live music with just this productive, enjoyable way for us to come together and talk about and remember and pass along the tradition of live Phish concert going.
And that's it for today's conversation with Stephanie Jenkins about Phish at Dick's in 2011. Throughout our conversation, we actually did not have too many facts that we got wrong or points of confusion, but there are just enough to warrant a fact check for today's episode. First, Stephanie says that she had an epiphany for her philosophy and Phish college course during the version of Light that Phish played at Dick's on September 1st, 2012. That version of the song has since passed into legend as arguably the best version of the song performed to date, and certainly one of the better jams of the 3.0 era. Must-listen stuff. In addition to the Female Centrics podcast, Stephanie appeared on a podcast called Rock School on July 29th, 2018. That podcast is where she went into detail about her class field trip to the Gorge. It was a pretty fun podcast to listen to, although be aware if you listen to the show, the host is quite the noob. And when discussing the first set of today's show, I mentioned that I didn't know how frequently Sweet Virginia was played before or after it made an appearance at Dick's. According to Phish.net, the Rolling Stones song has appeared just 5 times in the band's history. It debuted on September 26, 1999 at the Uno Lakefront Arena in New Orleans, and it didn't come back until the Exile on Main Street set on Halloween 2009. At the time of this recording, it's been played just once more since this show at Dick's on June 24th, 2012 at the Blossom Music Center near Cleveland. And that's it for today's episode of Attendance Bias. I'd like to thank Dr. Stephanie Jenkins for a great chat, Phish.net for providing all the information we'll ever need, and Phish.in for such an incredible sounding recording of this show. If you enjoy Attendance Bias, please support the show by leaving a rating and a review of the show on your podcast app of choice. Or you could just tell one person about the podcast. Call them, text them, tell them about it, whatever. Just spread the word. I'd be eternally grateful. Thank you again for listening, and I'll see you next week on Attendance Bias.